See, we got yo, what up?
What's up, man?
Chilling, man, chilling, man. I actually I broke my tripod, so I had to, make
Too
some
passionate.
adjustments. I know, man. I gotta stop buying cheap stuff. You know what I mean?
That's
Gotta
true.
stay out of the clearance, but you
That's
know,
true.
what's good, man? How you living?
I'm living all right, man. Just another day in Iraq. You know,
Big fun,
lots of fun. So much
right?
fun. Food's great.
Yeah, I know. Yeah, yeah, food's great. Weather's wonderful. Lots of sand and more sand.
Just having a great time out here, you know.
hmm Yeah, no, I feel you. I feel you. I feel you, man. So real quick, here's something funny I read on the way here.
hmm
So, and this probably could be a whole other conversation for another topic, but I read an article before we got on, and it was saying that Americans who live in former Confederate states are more likely to say that violent protest against the government is justified. That's an
I could definitely,
interesting.
I could see that. Yeah.
That's an
Well,
interesting like perspective.
what's crazy is Southerners by nature are usually more state oriented. You're more into state rights, right?
Right.
And what's happened, in more recent years is that because of the way politics are thrown at people, you see a lot more of, Southerners being more conservative, but they're conservative towards state issues and they're weary of federal issues. So when it
Right.
comes to, violent protest against the government or government entities, yeah, the South is more prone. I mean, we're more prone to, have a civil war and be like, hey, fuck off,
Right.
national government,
Right. I mean,
uh,
because you had to figure. I mean, they essentially I mean, obviously they were the ones that kind of initiated the Civil War. In many aspects, or stood in violent protest against the North. You know what I mean? And it led into it led to, as we know, the Civil War. I think so. I was looking at that in so many different aspects as I kind of was breaking that down. I think that's an interesting choice of language because I think that with all
former
the
Confederate states. Yeah.
right, like former Confederate states, and like it's really leaning into that whole like Southern white backwood hillbilly folks are violent against the government. And here's what's so okay, so here's where it gets a little controversial. When they say that, you say that as if there's something wrong with violent protest against the government, when in reality, I could see how I get it. Don't get me wrong. I'm not saying we should be out here just trying to, blow up government buildings, nothing like that. Obviously not. However, if you think about it, in a bit of a way about it, America was established on a violent protest against the British government. I mean, because the British government had become. Because think about it, violence is warranted in the state against tyranny.
Well,
So
100%. So the way they worded it a specific reason because right now, obviously, civil unrest and racism and North versus South, whites versus black is a big, huge
right,
topic, political
right,
topic. They could have just said Southern states, but they used former Confederate states because it's a
right,
political weapon. It's a
right,
weaponized ideology. You
right,
know what I'm saying? And we've dove into a little bit of that stuff when it comes to like the Civil War and like was the Civil War fought over slavery or with this and this and that. I mean, and that's stuff that we can go back and forth. And,
right,
there's a lot of material to go through and research
right.
and a lot of data that supports yes and supports no. And it's really kind of comes down to how you look at it as a whole. But obviously using those words, those specific words, former Confederate states, you're making a statement. You're saying that so if you're from the South and you supported the Confederacy, or I'm sorry, if you support violent protests against the government, then obviously you must be a white supremacist because they were the
Right.
Confederates back in the day.
Exactly. You must be a white supremacist, January 6th insurgent. You know what I mean? You must be
Now
all of
you
these things.
now you dial it back. You dial it back to the summer of 2020 when everyone was tearing everything up over George Floyd, and I even fucking came out and said this. I said, "Look, man," I said those people in Black Lives Matter would have everyone in the country behind them if all they would have done is attack the police and the government buildings because they felt the government and the police were corrupt. If all they did was, set fire to that and attack that, I'm not saying it's 100% right, but that is something I could sit there and be like, you know what, I understand your frustration and you didn't destroy, the target. You know
Right.
what I'm saying? You didn't
Right.
destroy everything. Now, I'm not saying it was those actual groups, because
Right.
we know that there's plans from the government to
Right.
rile everybody
Right.
up and push them into violence and
Right.
everything like that. But if most of the things that would have been attacked in every city across America within government and police, in my mind, your protest makes more sense and it has more credence and more grounding because you were disciplined enough. When
Right.
the Americans, when we broke away from the British, from the British, right? We didn't just set fire to everybody.
Right.
Now, if you supported the British, you got set on fire. You know what I'm saying? But
Right.
it's not like
Right.
Randy is a huge supporter of America, and I'm a supporter of America, but I'm gonna burn down Randy's store because I just feel like getting some new shoes,
Right.
even though the British are the ones taxing us. So it's
Right.
kind it's
I
kind of
think
it's kind of one of those
yeah.
things.
Yeah, I think focused violence is the key. I think that like my thing is this. So in some aspects, once again, you got to think it's written in the Declaration of Independence. It says, should the government no longer service the people have a right to overthrow their government and establish a new one. And I think many people don't realize that the country was built on violent protest against tyranny. And I think if tyranny is involved, if there's tyranny in a situation, it's the same thing when you rise up against your slave master. It's like you are rising up against the tyranny of the slave master, the violence that has been put up against you. And so therefore, in many aspects, of course, violence begets violence. Now, of course, I do not condone like just going senseless violence is where we have a problem. You see what I'm saying? When it's just violence for the sake of violence, we have a problem. But if it's in defense of that which I love, it's like I wrote this down the other day, men were not made for war. Men were made to love. But in order to protect what we love, we are prepared for war. You see what I'm saying? And so that's how
100%
that
right.
operates. So that's how I look at that. And so I think that, I say I think we could really go into when is violence necessary and when it is not. Yeah, I mean, I think that's a whole
I
conversation.
mean, I mean, we're already started. You know what I'm saying? I mean,
Yeah, yeah, yeah,
we can just flip flop topics tonight. I mean,
yeah, yeah,
we got
yeah.
we got an unlimited amount of shows in our future.
Right,
You know what I'm saying?
right,
When is violence? I mean, when is violence acceptable against the government?
right.
I mean,
When is it right? And you got to
at
think.
what
You
point?
remember, right? And you got to remember. There's going to be propaganda. There's going to be messaging that comes out and says, well, it's going to frame it as if you feel that it's going to frame people in a position to where any thought against the government is considered immoral or wrong. You see what I'm saying? As opposed to this is wrong, and so I'm standing up against it. You see what I'm saying? Like it's one of those things where it's like it's unheard of. Like how dare you think about going against the government? Like yeah, what? That's crazy. You're a crazy conspiracy theorist. You're a wild man. Well, the reality is that if you think about it, there are many things that we could definitely be upset about. There are many things that we could definitely stand up against the government for. I mean, the reality is the government is supposed to be a government for the people, by the people. But when the government no longer services the people, it's just like if you have a job and somebody works for you, and then you turn around and you say, listen, you ain't doing your job, you're fired. You know what I mean? Like
Yeah.
like in any other situation, but it's funny because we frame this whole situation of like, it's like, yeah, we should be standing up against the system. We should be standing up against this racism. We should be standing up against this political party, blah, 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 blah. But nobody ever really, but it's always like, but not the government as a
Yeah.
whole. You know what I mean? Where like you stand up against, you can fight everybody else but the government. It's like a second, but you think about it, back in the day when we first established the Constitution, everything, it was first nature to stand up against the governments. You go back to the old world, that's literally what 90% of conflict was. Many of the people were standing up against governments that they disagreed with. I mean, they were standing up against leadership and authoritarians and people who were fighting. I mean, think about how many rebel groups throughout history have risen up in all these different countries, Mao's China, in Germany, in all these places. I mean, you go down the list.
Well, you got to be careful with that because also it's only if they win that it's righteous. It's only when they win that they're righteous, because you can look out throughout we can look throughout history and be like, the Nazi Party came to power, and for a minute in Germany they were righteous. The communists came to power in China and in Vietnam and Korea, so on and so forth, and they were righteous. They came to power in Russia in 1917, right? They
Mm,
were righteous. Did they turn out to be righteous over a long period of time? Absolutely not. But when you bring in this new idea of, a new sense of government or a new sense of living and being in society,
right.
and it sounds really good because what the people had before that had to be super bad. You know what I'm saying?
Right.
If you dive into, I mean, talking about Nazi Germany is very easy because if you look at Germany pre-World War II, you know, after World War One, they crushed the country. They
Yeah.
crushed the entire country. So, and they made it seem like,
Economically, everything,
yeah,
culturally,
they made
everything. Yeah.
they made it seem like Germany was the only country that was even involved in World War One. You know, nobody got sanctioned as hard as they did. Now I'm not saying what they did was right, but what I am saying is it's very easy if you sit there and try to put yourself in somebody where, you know, your money is so worthless that it takes hundreds of thousands of German Deutschmarks to equal $1 American, you know, pre-fall of the stock market in 1929. So they're so poor. And then all of a sudden this dude, and he's a nerdy looking dude who has put all his effort into just making what he's going to say sound good to the point where he will sweat and pass out in front of a
Yeah.
crowd in order to get his message out. And they're tired, they're hungry, they're poor. And this guy's like, I'm going to change your whole fucking life. I'm going to change your
Yeah.
whole life. I'm going to change
Right.
his whole country. I'm going to change the whole world.
Right.
And you're like, and then, you know, and then he slips in like, but we got to get rid of these people. And then you're kind of like, yeah,
Right.
fuck them people. You know what I mean?
Yeah.
So
Yeah.
it's very easy. It's very easy to see, you know,
Right.
and then we can also sit back and look at history and be like, was there a lot of righteous violence? You know,
Right.
was there times, you know, were we right to break away from the British government? You know,
Right.
very, very subjective. You know, a lot of this stuff is subjective when you look at it. And I think as we move into the more modern era, it's even more muddled over what we consider acceptable or not. Like I said, we're talking about recent events, 2020, right? I think that there was a problem in that city. I think that the people had a right to protest their grievances because they weren't being heard, and people felt like they weren't being heard across the country, so it spread across the country. Where it got messed up and muddled is when it spread from we're going to punish the people who are responsible or who we feel are responsible to we're just going to punish everybody in our way.
Right.
And that's not
Right.
you lose,
Right.
in my mind, you lose your righteousness.
Right.
Your cause is now a lost cause to me because I can't get
It's
behind, no matter how good
right.
it sounds, I can't get behind it if you're just wanton destruction and you're hurting innocent
Yeah.
people. You're not
Yeah.
righteous
I
anymore.
mean, it's the same thing. It's the same thing as when you have focused anger and righteous anger as opposed to a fit of rage. You see what I'm saying?
Yeah.
It's like you can be absolutely pissed, but you're focused. You're disciplined enough to be able to say, I'm going to channel this anger directly at you specific. It's like the same thing. It's like, you know, back in the, yo, what up, Just Lyrics? You hold it down, boy. But it's just like when, you know, back in the day when men had a problem, they would have a duel. You know what I mean? It was you and me back to back. You know, we walked 12 o'clock noon, you know what I'm saying, and we'd have a duel. Or men, fast forward in the modern era, it used to be where you had a problem. You and your boys, y'all meet in the alley, you and him, you know, me go in the parking lot, you and him, you go fist to cuffs, boom, 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 you know, and then call it a day. But unfortunately nowadays it's become this this uncontrolled emotion. And so therefore the uncontrolled emotion runs rampant throughout society. And so whenever you're upset about something, everybody has to pay. Whenever you want something done, everybody's got to be on board. Everybody's it's a broad brush thought process, and that's what's dangerous. You know, and what's interesting is that when you look at we got let me see this comment here. Yeah. Let's
Yeah,
see.
mostly like nothing. It will devour itself. We are so divided here in the States in liberalism. I mean, in the truest sense of the form. Yeah, I understand what you're saying. Yeah, the problem is modernity is killing me. Jordan Peterson actually does a really good talk about how you need both. You need conservative and you need liberals because sometimes you need to be more progressive. You need to have forward thinking, but sometimes you need to remember what you're doing and why you're doing it. And that's why you need to have a good, healthy balance of being a conservative and a liberal. I'm trying to use these words without the
Right.
connotations that they have,
Right.
how we think about it today.
Right.
Conservative just means you're okay with the past, you're okay with the way things are going, and the liberals are
Tradition,
obviously
that kind of stuff, structure, right.
looking forward. And so you're absolutely right. We're so divided, and now these words are weaponized at
Right.
people. They're like, "Oh, you're too
Right.
conservative, you're too liberal." Well, at a certain point, the liberals got really, really crazy, and that's what we're seeing right now. Like it's completely out of hand to the point where a lot of liberal people are being like, "Man, you know, like maybe we went too far." On the flip side, when that pendulum swings, now we have conservatives that are just, I mean, we're too conservative. Like we're talking like
Right.
so conservative that we've jumped back a few hundred years in our thinking.
Right.
And neither side is healthy because neither side is progressing our society
Right.
anywhere near
Right.
forward to a better future.
Right.
So you're 100%, Damien.
Well, and Yeah, that's absolutely true. And I think the other side of it is that, one, to clarify, like, we're not talking about Republicans or Democrats. It's conservative and liberalism. They are not mutually exclusive, because there used to be a liberal Republican Party. You know what I mean? There used to be a conservative Democratic Party. Like, people don't understand that. So, but I would say it's more ideological. But I think the other side of it's like what I said a few weeks ago, and it was like, extreme liberalism is anarchy and extreme conservatism is inquisition. You know what I mean? It's like you get to this place where, you're getting two sides of the same thing. And if you think about it, in the extreme, it's chaos and order. You know what I mean? It's chaos and structure, but then it can be complete and total chaos, or it can be complete and total totalitarianism. You know what I mean? In many aspects, and so I think there's a place where you have to meet, in that middle ground. I wanted to bring something up which kind of goes hand in hand with conflict, communication, and it goes hand in hand with what we're talking about with violence and rebels and all that kind of stuff. Now you look at it let's look at this. You look at Malcolm and Martin, right? See, these two guys, both of them were considered rebels against the state, rebels against the government, rebels against the established order. Both of them were considered such. One believed in the violent approach and believed in violence, and you don't want to give me anything, I'm going to take it, and you will not take anything from me, and I will stand and protect whatever I need to protect. And matter of fact, I'm coming to your house and I'm taking it. You know what I mean? In many aspects, some of the more extreme fringes of Malcolm's party. Malcolm kind of came to a little bit of a middle ground, coming to the end of close to the end of his life, but as a whole, he believed in righteous violence in many aspects, which on the flip side, Martin was the opposite. Martin believed that peace was the path to overcoming oppression. Peace, when he believed in, we will love people to life in many aspects, and we will stand peacefully, and we will not give you we will beat, like I say, kill them with kindness in many aspects. And some people look at that and they like, man, you crazy. You ain't finna just beat my people up, and we ain't finna just say something and do something. But then on the flip side, if you look at who made the most impact, that's the question. You guys, who made the most impact? And I think a lot of it was because of the era that they lived in. Because you think about it, Malcolm had a strong standing in group, but how much change really came on a massive scale as opposed to how much movement came from Martin's movement? And if you look at it at the end of Malcolm's life, he began to kind of waver a little bit when it came to his approach, because Malcolm was not an idiot. He was brilliant. You know what I mean? And I think once he was able to break away from a lot of the Nation of Islam influence, I think that, like the corrupted side of the Nation of Islam, I think he began to see things a little bit differently. And I think they both saw a mutual respect in each other. So the question becomes, the path to peace, is it peace or is it war? That's the question.
So yeah, no, I really like that example that you used, using Malcolm and Martin, because I feel like it really shows two different types of approaches,
Right.
and it shows that your era that you live in has to match your approach. I think that's a good lesson you can take from it. Okay, so when Malcolm X busted on the scene, there was already tension. Right? There's already tension. And instead of meeting it with any type of mediary, he also brought in a different view. We're a predominantly Christian country, especially back in that era, from the 40s through the 70s.
Yeah.
Right?
Yeah.
He brings in this brand new religion with this brand new way of thinking. Obviously it's not brand new, but it's brand new to the mainstream of how we understood it.
Right.
Right. And his approach,
in that time.
I did appreciate the very disciplined approach that he showed. I watched the movie. I think I've read a few articles on it and stuff like that, just inside the Brotherhood and everything like that. And it's just their philosophies and stuff like that. Obviously, it's not something that I super agree with, but I always respect disciplined organizations. Right. So when he brought this more militant wing of Islam to the Black community, I think they rallied behind it because years of just not getting where they needed to be. Right. Whereas I think Martin actually took the time to look at his era that he was in, and he realized that it would be a much more bloody, a much longer process if it was more like an open revolt. You know what I'm saying? Like that, because
Right.
you already
Right.
had people on both sides of the fence that were starting to come across. Um,
Right.
and instead of violence, he fought violence even harder with peace. Now that worked for his time period. Now you dial it back 100 years, it never would have worked. You know what I'm saying?
Right. Right.
You dial it 100 years in the future, it may not work. But he was able to read his time to accomplish his goal or get closer to it, because he obviously he didn't live to see it, but he got
Right.
closer to seeing his goal than his predecessors did and the people after him did, because he spent the time and he read the the era that he was in. So I think you can definitely take that. So sometimes the righteous violence is just not put in the correct spot,
Right.
um,
Right.
that it needs to be in, if that makes sense.
Yeah, yeah, yeah. No, for sure. I mean, I think they were both in many aspects. I think Malcolm, I think Malcolm in many aspects was so far ahead of his time. I think that's another thing. I think Malcolm was way ahead of his time with the way that he understood and thought about the established order in the system and the governments, and how he saw through the liberal, what do you say, the white liberals, and how they how they utilize and have mastered the art of befriending the Negro, but he also saw through the false identities of the tradition of conservatism and how
Yeah.
that's just an excuse to be able to use it against the people. I think he saw things through the established order and system that were so far ahead of his time that people just like I would watch him go on these shows and he would just dumbfound these interviewers and these people that he would debate with and stuff, and it's just like, wow, okay, very well then. But I think, and so you made a good point. You said something about, in order to be effective, you have to understand the era that you're in. You know what I mean? You have to understand the season that you're in. And I think that goes not just from a government or global rebellion perspective. I think that applies to on a daily basis when you're having conflict in your own lives or dealing with your own relationships. You know what I mean? I think it starts there. You know what I mean? It starts with on the inside tract. If you're in a system where, like, if me and you are having an issue, what season are both of us in? You see what I'm saying?
Yeah.
What are we dealing with at the certain times? And I think that goes with, we see a lot of these arguments with debates about politics and stuff. A lot of times people are speaking from a place of hurt and not necessarily from a place of understanding. People are not speaking from a place of knowledge, they're speaking from a place of pain. And so when you're discussing an issue, whether you're debating with a person about politics or race or lifestyle, or you're debating with your girlfriend about something going wrong in the relationship, a lot of times it's coming from a place of pain. It's coming from a place of brokenness. It's coming from a place of emptiness. And so therefore, it may not necessarily always make total sense, and it may not necessarily need a direct answer or a response at the time. Sometimes it just needs a vent. You know what I mean? And,
Yeah.
and that's the hard
No,
part.
100%, man. And I mean, I think using personal examples, because first of all, I think that there's too many people on the internet that speak from it's like they're already at the end of their road, their healing journey, their
Right.
growing journey, and it's almost like they're talking down to people. Like, if you don't follow the road that I found, you're not going to become a better person. So like when I like to talk about things like this, especially arguments, man, I can tell you that the way I get into arguments, especially when it pertains to relationships, has absolutely changed over the years, right? Because now you're right. When you get into an argument with a significant other, a lot of times it is from a place of hurt. One of you has hurt the other person.
Yeah.
If both of you are hurt, it's going to be a bad situation all around. And what I've really strived to do, and what I still struggle to do, is try to approach everything from a calm perspective and put myself in their shoes and see where they're coming from. Now, does that mean I'm perfect every time? Absolutely not. I just had one the other night, and I think there were some things I handled very well and some things I handled very poorly. You know, some things were said on both sides that I feel were very hurtful. And had I been the person, that I say I want to be, I wouldn't have given into that, and I would continue down that path. But I was kind of taken aback, and I was kind of hurt about it, and I just kind of just went with it. So I'm gonna go ahead and give myself a failure on that argument, just because I tried, dude. I went into it knowing it was going to be an argument, and I tried my very, very hardest to not be that person, and bro, I failed.
Yeah.
I failed. But I'm going to take that into the next argument I have with a significant other, and try not to, it's
Right.
I think people forget that, we're talking about conflict resolution. I think you have to be in conflict in order to understand how to to
Right.
resolve conflict. And
Right.
since I've been in a lot of conflict, I felt I was going into this with a lot more knowledge than I had, and I had gone into it with a lot more knowledge than I'd had in the past. But I definitely it got to a point where I was hurt. I was so hurt that I couldn't see past my own pain, and so I wanted to inflict hurt. And how many times when you're having a conversation with somebody about politics or race or religion, and they're coming from a place of hurt, and they're not arguing with you anymore. They're not trying to explain their point. They're literally just trying to break you down. So
Right.
when we get to that
Right.
point, I think it's a good time to just back away, collect your thoughts, understand what we're actually talking about. Because how many times have you gotten into an argument or a discussion with somebody and you're not even on the same topic? You're mad at each other, but not about the topic, about something
Right.
else.
Right.
Because you've completely moved away from it because you're in a place of hurt, because
Right.
you're in a place of pain. So everything that you're saying, 100%, and I can tell you from recent experience, that it doesn't get any easier. I don't think there's any perfect way to argue, but I do think that you can teach yourself how to approach things and view things in a different light, over time. And it takes practice, and you're gonna fail at it because that's what we do when we're
Right.
improving on ourselves. We fail a lot.
Right.
You got to keep at it though, man. You got to keep trying to, you got to try to keep open communication. Communication is such an important thing in life. And that's the whole reason why we have this show, because we want to learn we want to communicate with each other. We want to talk about the hard things that people are literally killing each other over.
Yeah.
And instead of
And I,
being angry and stuff, we invite people on the show. Tell us how you feel. I would love to get somebody on the show that completely disagrees with what we're talking about, just
yeah.
so we can have a conversation about it.
Yeah. No, for sure. I mean, I think that's invaluable. And I think it's funny. If you think about it, everything that we're dealing with from a political standpoint, a cultural standpoint, I mean, a social standpoint, you look at everything and all of it is simply just misunderstandings. It's miscommunication and misunderstandings back and forth, back and forth, back and forth. And I think that until we get to a place where we take the time to really, okay, until we get to a place where we truly understand, okay, this is where you're coming from, this is why you're coming from there, we'll always continue to go back and forth. You know what I mean? Because and even on a more malicious side, there are some people that have a very malicious plan. Like, this is where I want to go. You know what I'm saying? Like, this is, let me see if y'all read Alexander Duggan stuff at all. I think y'all would dig
He
it. It's
might.
pretty much well.
No, but I'll definitely write it down.
No, yeah, I'll check it out for sure. Hey, appreciate that. I'll definitely check it out. But yeah, I think that, when I look at what we're dealing with as a culture and a society, I mean, one of the biggest problems that we have is just nobody can get on the same page, because you got a handful of people that want to watch the world burn in many aspects. Like, that's reality. They're like, the fact that people actually think, like, I always find it funny that people don't believe that, like, evil really exists. Like, we kind of talked about that a while ago. Like,
Yeah.
people don't believe there aren't people out there who are really doing some really horrible, depraved, evil stuff, and they really want to watch the world burn. They really they really make money off of the destruction and crisis, and they do, like, there's people really out there doing all of the things that you call conspiracy. Like, there's really people out there doing that. And then on the flip side, you have the people that there are really people out there trying to fight it for real, that are not crazy people. They're not fringe, right wing, all not like, no, bro, there's people on both sides who are really trying to stand up for the betterment of society and the future of our children. Like, that's a real thing that people are really trying to do, and they're doing it from a real place of care and love. There are people who do really love out there, who love unconditionally. There are people who are empathetic for real, who are sympathetic for real. There are people who are, like, there are so many people out there who really stand for something. It's not all just crazy folks, you know what I mean? But because we can't take the time to just sit back and actually listen to what people are talking about, to listen to what people are standing for in real life, even if at first you disagree, take some time to let the argument make its way all the way through. Let them get it all out. Get to the end result of what they're trying to say. And you might realize that it just looked a little bumpy on the road at first, but at the end of the road, they actually make sense. But like I said, it goes for anything, man. If we could just actually let people get to the end of their position, let people get to their point, even if it goes around and around. Let people get to the point, because you might get to the point and say, you know what, that's not as crazy as I thought it was. That's not as wild as I thought it was. That's not as off as I thought it was. You know what I'm saying? You
Yeah,
know,
I think
so
too many times nowadays, people tend to um, they want to cut people off because they don't. It's understanding how someone got to the reason that they believe. Like, how did we arrive at this conclusion, right? How did you know?